Okay, that's good. Hi, Brett. Oh, hi, Charles. I can see you there. We're going. Oh, sorry. This is this awkward thing. Only one can talk at a time, and there's a little lag. It's a deadly combination. So, everyone, this is our last lecture, which is very sad. But one very exciting thing about it is that we're going to start straight away with a guest spot from someone who I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to, Charles, who you can hopefully see on your screen. Charles, I've put his bio up on the website. Charles has done just about everything. It's quite amazing. He's an expert and has an extensive history dealing with companies and helping them with problems. With setting up operation centers, SOCs, and we're going to be talking about that today, and some military background, and also was on at ground zero essentially after the Sony PlayStation hack, and was sort of responsible for fixing all that up. So Charles, I'll shut up. Do you want to just say just a few words about yourself, and then we can start a sort of Q&A session?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So yeah, I'm Charles. I joined ARNet back in January as the Chief Information Security Officer. And prior to that, I spent a few years at Palo Alto Networks as we were growing out that business. And then, as Richard mentioned, a couple years at Sony Playstation, picking up the pieces after all of that happened. And prior to that, I was part of a startup when we were really tiny, and then went through a $1.5 billion acquisition when they bought us to go into HP. Which is when I decided to jump ship and go to Sony during the breach. So my background's primarily in building and managing security operations or security intelligence centers, kind of both sides of the fence, and spent all of my time within the Fortune 50 in the States. So like Apple was one of my SOCs for everybody who runs around with an iPhone. So worked there for a while when I was at ArcSight as a consultant, and some of the others, but made the decision a couple years back, my wife and I, that we wanted to move to Australia. And so after kind of searching for a while, ARNet came along, and the project seemed really cool. So we're actually, as we speak, building out a security operations center that will be built off of the backbone. So if you folks don't know who ARNet is, we provide all the internet services for your university that you're running on. So ARNet brought the internet to Australia. They were the first ISP, and then sold the commercial wing off to Telstra and focused purely on research and education. So I'm building a SOC that will be open to and cover all the folks that are subscribers. So that's all the universities, as well as galleries, libraries, arts, and museums. Like Sydney Opera House is also one of our customers coming through that network. So we've got quite a bit of stuff in there, and yeah, it's a really exciting project. You're on mute, Richard.
You know, Charles, I gave a whole lecture on mute once, and the students didn't tell me. They just sat there smiling, looking really happy the whole time.
I'm so used to it during work meetings.
I was just going to say that ARNet is quite famous. You sort of alluded to that. They are in the backbone of the Australian internet culture. They are very, very respected and have enormous capacity and capability across the country. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, to the point where we own our own undersea cables going to California, Singapore, Japan, India. We're running one to the UK right now. So yeah, it's really interesting. I had no idea who ARNet was until they came to me for this, but once I learned, I kind of fell in love with what the folks are trying to do.
Fantastic. Hey, I was going to ask you to tell everyone about SOCs and talk about that, but before we do that, I've always wanted to know about laying cable. Are you involved in that at all? How does that whole thing work? Is it just a slow-moving ship with a big hose?
It's exactly that, with divers that go down and mount up the repeaters on the boxes, and then we can run those. So that's one of the first things we're onboarding into the SOC, is that we can see all the different repeaters under the water. You know, we're worried about nation state things like folks being able to hack the cables, you know, tap the communications. And once you get into optical network security, it's actually kind of a scary space, as far as there's not a lot that happens in security on the cables themselves. So we partner with a lot of folks. Google primarily is one of the big ones. We partner with Singapore for the one we just ran. And then we're also now moving towards satellites. So partnering with SpaceX on the Starlink program and some of the stuff that we're going to start putting up into space as well.
Wow. Yeah, the physical security of cables. I mean, there's a long history of nation states tapping those with lots of fun.
There's submarines built just to do it.
But it sounds like you're laying your one at a depth that's easy to access, so you can put repeaters on it. Is that right?
Well, so they're already on them, but then when it comes to where they're mounted, it's either a submersible that gets it laid on the bed, or if it's shallow enough, then it's divers that go down.
Here's an interesting question for you. If you guys did stumble across a tap on the line,
there would be that would come into foreign policy, so we would simply hand that over to the Australian government.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's really not up to you to deal with that, is it?
Yeah, that's foreign policy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, everyone should read about that, and the famous telegram that brought the US into the Second World War, I think, was a result of a cable, a different sort of cable tap. So yeah, this physical security is very interesting, and as you say, hard to detect. So a SOC, SOCs are everywhere now. Some of these guys will eventually work for SOCs. Do you want to just tell everyone what a SOC is and what you're trying to do? Maybe even some of the history of SOCs.
Yeah. So first, I guess SOC is most of the time 24/7 operations center where we look for bad things happening in the network. So we care about hackers as they get in, and then what we can do to try to get them back out of the network. So we are not to be confused with a NOC, which would be a network operations center, and they're more concerned about the availability and uptime of networks. So we are concerned about the confidentiality and integrity of those networks. So we typically monitor everything from designing the use cases. So I'm looking for network behavior anomaly detection, or some sort of like user behavior anomaly. Everything's really quite machine learning based these days. So we've made kind of a hard pivot in the last 3 years towards ML technologies to help us. And then where SOCs kind of started, they started as a function of the NOC, back in the early 80s, really. IBM was probably the first company to really master what a SOC was back in those days. And then since then, it's evolved to encompass, as I said, monitoring, like developing monitoring use cases, but also handling the entire incident response chain. So as we find somebody doing something, then we go deal with that, both at a tactical and strategic perspective. So tactical meaning like a combat medic, I stop the bleeding in the field now, so just get the adversary out and then let IT or whoever go and clean everything up. But then strategic is then, what went wrong? How can we learn from that? And then making sure that our security investments can kind of address that down the road. And SOC is an incredibly expensive function. So it's typically by far the most expensive group inside of InfoSec.org. To give you a bit of a baseline for that. So HP Global SOC was one of mine that I built. And we spent in just the first year about $13.5 million standing that up US. By the time we hit year 3, we were near 100 million in spend worldwide for the security program. And so we went from nothing to a team of about 70 people. And then again, because SOC will help guide that budget, so we didn't consume the whole 100 million. I'd say out of that, we were probably a good third of that was just spent on the SOC. But then as we find things and say, these devices aren't working, these firewalls are ancient, we don't have any sort of anomaly detection capabilities, so on, then all these other teams like network engineering or systems engineering, so on, has to start spending budget as well. But the thing that's really neat about SOC is it's the only team in a company that typically has that full big picture view of what's happening, because we're the customer of all the data. We have to understand application security, user security. We have to be fluent in things like Active Directory. We have to be fluent in database technologies, SQL, so on. And then we typically also staff some level of developers inside the SOC, both because we have to build our own use cases, but also because a lot of applications log in code. And so we have to, like, if you've ever had the pleasure and misfortune of looking at things like Catalina logs, it's all in just complete Java nonsense. And if you want to build use cases out of that, you also have to know code pretty decently as well. So you get a really neat cross-section of a company when you're inside a SOC, from a business perspective, security perspective, so on. So I kind of got passionate about that. Once you see how the company runs from that perspective, it's hard to give that up.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I'm really glad you brought that up. It always seemed to me it's such an interesting place because it sits at the intersection of, you're sort of like the spider in the middle of the web. You've got technical, you've got human, you oversee the operational side of the company. You're presumably involved in strategic, and you also do incident response, which I'm really interested in. And I just was thinking, just when you started talking, I was remembering the last words I said. They were echoing in my head, and I thought, that wasn't right, was it? And it was polite of you not to pick me up. But the telegram actually brought America into the First World War, wasn't it? The Zimmerman.
Yes, because I was like, I thought Japan brought us into the Second World War, but yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's the level of quality of education that. But it was polite of you not to pick me up on that. But please do, because the students are very happy to. Right. Now, yeah. So, could you maybe tell us a little bit about what your, like, the people that work in a SOC? Are they your technical people, because these guys are very technical, or are they what sort of skills do you look for in a SOC? What makes a job interesting?
It's a good mix. So there's not a one size fits all, and we typically find folks that are really specialized in certain areas, but then have a broad understanding, let's say wide and shallow, of other areas. But everybody inside the SOC will be a mile wide and an inch deep across everything, so well-rounded. But then each person inside the SOC will be an inch wide and a mile deep in some specific thing they understand. So my background was working in cyber intelligence in the military before I came into doing this. So I was very focused on translating signals into human actions, right? And so that's something I constantly drive, into the analysts' heads, is that it's not a machine versus a machine, it's a human versus a human. All attacks in history, whether they're cyber, physical, or otherwise, trace to four main motivators: money, ideology, conscience, and ego. And understanding those motivations is the difference between you being in the news or not. And so, but then you'll have other folks where I feel like the dumbest guy at the table when everybody's sitting around talking, that, we're hiring now a couple data scientists into the team that are going to be managing all of our ML libraries. We've got some folks in the team that are just truly really decent. I'm glad you're working for the good guys sort of folks that they get it in a way that always amazes me. And then we've got business administration focused folks that just understand how business processes run. The last thing you want to do as a security team is just constantly be the one that says no to everybody. Security needs to enable a business, not restrict a business. And so the quickest way to build enemies in the org is telling folks, I'm taking away your local admin privileges on the machine. But we can be much more intelligent at that and do this in a better way. And so understanding business processes and business operations are crucial. And so typically, I try not to have folks in the SOC who look too much like each other skill set wise. We want to have a pretty diverse bench of skills.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I think your background, you mentioned when we were chatting before, is anthropology.
Yeah, so my degree is in anthropology of all things, so biological anthropology, and then I somehow had a very windy road to get into the role I'm in today. But I actually love it because, for me, the thing that's the most fascinating, and again, everybody in my team would have different opinions on what they feel are the most fascinating aspects, but I love the way that humans affect my job, and kind of knowing that difference. And so I promised, Richard coming in, that I would tell a story, a PlayStation War story, that was I did a presentation at RSA in 2012.
Just before we tell the story.
Yep.
Sorry, Charles. This is the exciting bit. This is the thing that just blew me away, that you were there for the PlayStation thing. But can I just follow up just before you leave to the anthropology and the incident response? I sort of am quite jealous. I think anthropology is something I need to know more about, and I'm doing a lot of reading about it at the moment. It seems to me understanding humans and human motivation at scale and at a societal level and so on. Sociology and actually, could you tell us what's the difference between sociology and anthropology? Is that easy?
There's religious debate in that one. I won't try to explain what is the difference between cultural anthropology and sociology. And I have the privilege to say that I was in biological anthropology, which means that we were looking at, teeth that were 100,000 years old and trying to understand what their migratory habits where you throughout the seasons to say that, these folks traded with these folks and went from here to here and so on. So while I find cultural anthropology interesting, my focus was actually, looking at monkey teeth and trying to draw similar patterns to human migration to show that the animals followed animals. And so I worked under a brilliant anthropologist. He's kind of world famous in anthropology, Dr. Peter Unger. And it was between Dr. Peter Unger and another gentleman, Dr. Trinkhaus, that were the ones that worked together between dental morphology, which is what Dr. Unger studied, and then sequencing ancient DNA, which is what Dr. Trinkhaus worked on. And they were the ones that came up with the original theory that we did not conquer nor, push into extinction Neanderthals. We bred them out of existence.
Yeah. Much sadder in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess brain cases, I know there's work on the insides of brains and skulls and things like that. You can work out the shapes of is that also biological? This is...
It would be, but I had nothing to do with that.
But certainly inside your sock, were you ever to find the tooth of an attacker, you would not be the dumbest guy on the table. At that point, everyone...
That'd be as somebody probably knocked his teeth out. So...
So can you, and then just before we talk about Sony, can you just talk us in general about incident response? So not all the planning and the feedback and things, but when something's happening, what for you are the most important elements of a SOC to deal with that? And who do you want on your team? Just super quick.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Real-time and ongoing context during an incident is by far the most important thing that you can have. Knowing how to answer, who, what, when, where, which is really the job of the technology, but then answering how and why. So how would be the machine component of that. So it happened via SQL injection against a database that was vulnerable to this, and just establishing what that entire sequence of events look like is contrary to the movies. It's not like somebody bangs a few hands on a keyboard and then away they are. This stuff takes weeks, sometimes months to carry out a successful breach. It's why one of my favorite things, folks say is adversary only has to be right once. We have to be right every single time. That is complete patent false. The adversary has to be right so many steps through that. And so we maintain that context of what's happening. I tell the analysts, I don't care that we get hacked. We're going to get hacked all the time. It's the nature of our jobs. What I care about is that the box the adversary popped is almost never the target. It is simply the weakest link. We're finding the first lily pad or the second lily pad in the environment. I care about next expected event. Where are they going next? What's the most likely thing they're going to do? So we're not just sitting and constantly being reactive to the adversary. And so for me, that's why just having good real-time contextual awareness is by far the most important thing during IR, because that allows us to answer who, what, when, where, how, and why. And if we understand the why, which is the most difficult thing, that's the money, ideology, conscience, ego, the human component. If we can answer that, then we can be pretty aggressive at becoming proactive and say, here's what I think they're going to do next.
And this leads us right into Sony. So when I was much younger, Sony was a great counterexample that we'd always talk about in security long before your times, Charles, because of various things that someone, maybe it was their CIO or a long time ago, had said. And then they started a series about security not being worth thinking about, not worth being investing in. And then a series of very embarrassing breaches then happened, and acts, including the, putting a Trojan essentially into some code that was released to customers, and then the attack. And the attack is so interesting. And you were there. When did you? So I assume no one knows the attack, though some will. Tell us a bit about that, and then when you came on the scene.
Yeah, so I'll start with when I came on, and then I'll go through the attack. So I was there day 2 of the breach. So I was still an ArcSight consultant. I was working, just finishing up building a SOC for a company called Fiserv, which is like financial services, Fiserv. So they move about $6 trillion a year in their network. So about a little over a third of the US GDP goes through their environment, which is really neat. And then my boss had called me. He was the MP in the consulting group and said, I have an excellent, amazing project that I know you'll say yes to, but for NDA, I can't tell you who they are or what's going on unless you say yes. And so I said yes. And so he said, I need you on a plane tonight. You're going to San Diego. PlayStation's been breached.
Wow.
That was day one. I got there in the office, day two of the breach, and as you can imagine, the building's on fire, news cameras are going to be in the parking lot in no time, sort of thing, and very much it got public about 2 weeks after the breach that it had happened, and then we had to start putting shading up in the windows and everything, so news cameras kind of film you inside the building. But yeah, because at that point in time it was the fourth largest breach in history. Now there are several that have dwarfed it since then, but for 2011 that was pretty big.
And what was the context like? What was the why here? Why?
Yeah, so let's get into that. It's one of my favorite stories to walk through, because I think it really explains what the job of the SOC is, but it also explains that it's almost always a bigger picture than what you think it is. So for those who don't know, so PlayStation was hacked in April of 2011. That resulted in 77, 78 million user records that were taken out of the environment. But there is a really long history of what led up to Sony being breached, and one that I think is really neat. So it actually begins all the way back in 2007 with a 17-year-old kid that had to handle GeoHots. If you guys are familiar with him, he is a super famous developer and security researcher now. But at the time, George Hotz is his actual name. At the time, 2007, he had built the first theoretical iPhone jailbreak. And then it took him about another year to where he built the first completely wireless iPhone jailbreak. So if any of you were like some of us back in the day, you would hold your phone, this many seconds, let go of this button, touch it again, shake it at the sky, hope the thing went into DFU mode and you didn't brick your phone. And if you did, folks like, well, at least in the US, AT&T and so on, they wouldn't refund the phone. And so you just wrecked a $1,000 phone. So he made this site called jailbreakme.pn or jailbreakme.to, and all you had to do is go to the site and just hit jailbreak me on your phone, completely untethered, completely wireless. It was a very slick jailbreak. And in fact, it was so slick that after it became public, Steve Jobs personally called him and offered him a job at Apple, and he said no, which turned him into an underground celebrity overnight because he was 17, going to Rochester Institute of Technology, which is second only to MIT in the US, which he later dropped out of. But at that point in time, I think he still had plans on finishing. And so that was that, and he moved on. About 2010 early, he started focusing his efforts on the PlayStation 3. So for folks who used a PlayStation 3, back in those days, you would turn it on and it would take a good probably 45 seconds to a minute to boot. And that was because it functioned almost like a PXE server. And so it was calling down all these Java files to load before the PlayStation would boot. And he said, I bet that that's exactly what's happening. But it was encrypted, so you couldn't see what the PlayStation was actually doing. So he went through and started working on jailbreaking it. When he jailbroke it, it made it to where he would cache that, and then he would just check the hash file, the MD5, and say, if it hasn't changed, no need to pull it back down. And so your PlayStation would boot in about 5 seconds. And so this became wildly popular. Now, unknown to him and everybody else, except for a few folks inside Sony, when you jailbroke that PlayStation, part of what he did is he exposed the keys to the PlayStation, the certificate keys. So you had clear text access to decrypt the bits and bytes that were coming and going from the PlayStation. He posted those on his WordPress blog as a way for folks to, once they jailbroke it, take the keys and then they could do stuff with it. What he didn't know is that Sony embedded those keys in hardware. And so once they were compromised, there was no way to roll those over. Not him, somebody else came along, about 6 months, I think it was, after the breach. And they made a hack for Call of Duty 3 Black Ops, which is what was out at the time, and said, decrypt the bits and bytes and modify the bits going back to convert a kill shot in Call of Duty that would be worth 1/16 of a skill point to be 100 skill points. And so this was posted, and very few people ever actually downloaded that, but Activision, who owns Call of Duty, became aware of that. Now, this person posted it anonymously. And so when Sony started doing the investigations, they couldn't find the person who made that, but they very easily found GeoHot's Jailbreak on his blog. And so he got sued by Sony. And so this is where the SOC story starts to come in. So he was sued by Sony, and this is back when like GoFundMe, these sort of organizations were just getting going. And he did an interview with a BBC reporter that I make all of our analysts watch during training, because it's just key. And he said a few things that were really, really important. I never intended to harm Sony. I had no idea Sony's security sucked this bad, and I would take it all back if I could. I am sorry. And somebody opened him a crowdfunding campaign that raised about $130,000 in 24 hours after that interview went live. And so that was, if that doesn't tell you as a company the public opinion is against you, I don't know what will. But Sony was brutal and vicious. They were setting an example. And so he still had to settle, even with all the money. So he settled in April 2011. And so there's no coincidence here. So he settled in April 2011 with specific things like you can't look at, touch, taste, dream, think about a Sony product for the rest of your life. You must also work with your ISP, with YouTube, with Google, with WordPress to turn over all IP addresses of everybody who downloaded that jailbreak, who visited your website, who sent you a PayPal donation, to turn over their IPs, because Sony planned to, because keep in mind, when you're connected on the console, like talking to the PlayStation Network, we have those logs. And so their plan was to ban all those PlayStations off the PlayStation Network and just cut the cancer out, right? Because Activision had told them, if you don't fix it, we are only releasing Call of Duty 4 on Xbox until you fix this. And so that actually, this whole breach accelerated PS4's release. It was supposed to come out several months later than what it actually did, but that was part of why PS4 got moved up, was because PS4 can roll those keys in software now. Anyways, so after the breach, after the settlement, there's two groups, Lil Sec Lizard Squad, who we came to know as Anonymous, came together and said, this is Big Brother, this kid did nothing wrong. And they posted a very threatening YouTube video that we're going to hack you inside and out, blah, 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 blah. 2 weeks later, I was there on site dealing with fallout from this. So, but the story didn't end there, because we had to work with the FBI and the Secret Service. Secret Service is not only for the President of the United States, they also deal with the US Treasury, and the US Treasury gets involved in massive breaches. And so we were dealing with the FBI and some other folks that we monitored the cost of PII. So the data that was lost from Sony was usernames, phone numbers, addresses, but there was no social security numbers, which is our kind of what you would call Medicare number here. That's what we call social security in the States. So no social security numbers and no credit card information. But PII is more expensive than credit card numbers in the underground, right? Because it's very easy to change a credit card number. It's very hard to change your name if you get breached. And so we monitored the cost of PII over the course of 12 months. And it never fluctuated by more than 10% all year long. There were no other major PII breaches that were sold in the way that like credit card numbers are. Now, when Target was breached 2 years later, the cost of credit card numbers had plummeted by more than 95%. So you had somewhere in the neighborhood, I think it was like 23 million credit card numbers that got sold. So that told us something really interesting from an intel perspective, right? This wasn't a monetary motivated breach. This was an ideologically motivated breach, right? And something else was really interesting in that. They never sold the data. They never had any intention on harming the PlayStation network. With the access they ended up getting during the breach, they could have done far more damage than what they did. They were after brand damage, something very public, something very noisy. But it actually, in the hack itself, was really clever. But we also think that they were young that did this. We think that they were probably in the neighborhood of 17 to mid 20s. For another kind of neat kind of, we worked with this company, Strauss Friedman, so we were doing a lot of back-end mining to try to track some folks down. But what do you do when you're young and you want to make a statement, right? You drag the kid out in the schoolyard and you punch him in front of everybody. What do you do when you're older and you want to do damage? Right? You hurt their wallet, right? You go after them financially. And these folks could have actually sold that money and caused the lawsuits to skyrocket. But we were actually able to get out of a lot of lawsuits because we were able to prove, with reasonable certainty that this data was never sold, that it was never reused. And so this is the job of the SOC, is to be able to tell the story I just did, right? It's a human versus a human. Going forward, Sony became very quiet in the news. They were no longer suing people. Even with Sony Playstation, where North Korea was threatening, so on, Sony was silent. They still released the movie, which is why all that happened, and that was separate from my environment. I only dealt with Sony Playstation, which was its own business. But Sony changed its operational behavior going forward. We moved half the PlayStation network to Amazon, but we also did media training. We started, restricting the amount of folks that could talk to media. We brought in a true legal team, like a staff of lawyers that worked in PlayStation going forward. And that was all because we were able to tell that story and say, if I would have seen that news report, we would have been, one, you just shouldn't sue, a 19-year-old kid in court that's a beloved hacker. That's kind of just, mistake number one. But on top of that, there's better ways to do it to keep yourself out of the media. And so that was something that I think, for Sony was a lesson, and to a lot of organizations around the world, it became a lesson that you don't necessarily want to make examples of folks in court. There are better ways to handle it. And so yeah, it was a really interesting breach. But, for me, just, seeing that, it can all start with just one celebrity going down, and it cost us about $1.3 billion in the end to totally recover from that.
That's fantastic. Wow. Thank you so much. I have so many things to ask you, but actually I want the students to have a chance to ask you. Can we just throw the floor open to questions just for a sec, because I'm sure there's lots of questions. Try and keep your questions short, guys, so everyone can have a shot.
What are your thoughts on automated threat analysis tools? What do you see as their pros and cons? If it's ML, automated tools, so we're heavily invested in a company called Exabeam, which works on the concept of peer grouping, affinity analysis, some of the more kind of common data models. Those tools have completely changed the game for security operations. We've been able to go from tens, if not 100 events an hour that are coming into a SOC that we have to, kind of like a fire hose, get on top of, to where we now manage events per day. So we're talking, 5, 10, 15 at most a day that we're dealing with that are only the highest anomalies. And then the rest of it, so you have automated detection and automated response. So automated detection would be things like Exabeam. Automated response, if you're familiar with some of the tools, would be like Phantom, Demisto, Swim Lane, and that's really what we call security orchestration. So think like a GUI on top of a bunch of Python scripts that allows us to go quickly delete a phishing email from people's inboxes, or reset, user accounts, or even just simply escalate and create a case somewhere in another queue. But those tools are the absolute future for us. The days of us sitting around and just saying, I'm looking for 10 failed logins in 1 minute are completely gone. Like we don't do that type of work anymore. It's loaded with false positives. So the automated piece, I'm a huge fan of. The thing that I guess to give the back end question to that is, what happens when the adversaries leverage those same type of tools, right? Because adversaries actually tend to be ahead of us, not behind us, when it comes to fancy new tool development. The thing that keeps me up is, what happens when they start using ML models against us that can just overwhelm us with, hundreds of thousands of events per hour that are all quite clever, and are running on unsupervised models that can, respond based on the moment it sees a sinkhole in IP. It now knows somebody's active, and so I'm going to change up my tactics and so on. And we are probably a short 12 to 18 months away from seeing these things start popping up on the dark web. And that scares me, because enterprises typically, it's really easy for a team like mine to implement these tools. It's very hard for a company to build processes around, new tools. And so, it's becoming harder and harder to run as fast as the adversary does.
That's a really interesting observation. There's not the limiting thing isn't the speed of writing the tool, it's writing the processes to use the tool and deploy it.
Yeah. Let's see, were you involved with those changes or legal media teams? So I myself, I led the security operations group. So the SOC, incident response, and security engineering teams. But we actually brought in a company called Strauss Friedman that helped us with a lot of the recommendations around that. That was an effort that came directly out of Tokyo. So we were Sony Networks, which is the back end of the PlayStation, and then Sony Computer Entertainment, which is the front end of the PlayStation, are all in California. And then we also have some offices in London. So we really ran at the direction of Tokyo through that. So Tokyo was the one that was implementing those changes, but part of that was us actually hiring a full legal team in the California business.
Fantastic.
Do you use machine learning to determine vulnerabilities, and what algorithms do you use? So we don't use machine learning to determine vulnerabilities. We use machine learning to understand what normal and abnormal behavior looks like. So we run it against, just think if you would break up a SOC into, I've got various network stuff that feeds me, like firewalls, IPS, WAF, proxy, VPN, any sort of NetFlow tool sets. And then I've got endpoint, which would be all your normal stuff, like the Windows application security system logs, but then also EDR, so like detection and response tool sets, so on. And then user is AD and any other sort of authentication stuff, and then finally application. So we use ML to baseline what is normal versus abnormal log activity. And so that way we can say, this is the first time this user connected to this system remotely from this OU in the environment. It's the first time they've ever sent this much data off that system over here. And then just start to follow that chain of what all their kind of session data looks like. So that's how we use it. But when you're talking about using it to detect vulnerabilities, there are companies like Fortify, HP bought them some time back, that was doing dynamic analysis code while it was running that would actually try to uncover vulnerabilities. So what algorithms they use, I have absolutely no clue. From our side, things like Markov, the line distance stuff is really interesting for us. So we use that to detect DGAs, so dynamically generated addresses. So this letter should never be this far from this letter in any known language, and then start replicating it. And this letter was this far from this one, and this one from this one, and I now have a 99% probability that this is a machine generated algorithm, because it simply isn't matching any kind of dictionary, language books. And so that becomes really effective for us, sorting out and finding, random CNC networks that are just squatting, spinning up and tearing down domains, squatting on them, so on. So the ML, the libraries on our side are not terribly complex at this point. I've got a really neat, I promised Richard also that I'd send you guys a couple kind of reading materials out of this. So I got a really neat white paper that we've done on the ML that we're doing inside the SOC. So I'll share that for any of you that are curious and seeing, what that looks like. And then, getting into kind of the product ML as far as, doing code analysis and so on, that's a bit out of our realm and what we deal with.
We know we've probably got time for one more question. Do you want to do Brandon's one?
Where did it go?
Obviously, there are ramifications to the prioritizing of security issues. How do you guys deal with these prioritizing ramifications? For example, negative results from prioritizing issues incorrectly.
Yeah, that's such a good question, and that's probably the thing that keeps me up at night the most in the SOC is making sure we're looking at the right thing at the right time. So it's more than just answering who, what, when, where. It's understanding how to answer who, what, when, where. So who is the user? What is their role? What is their criticality? What is the asset they're on? What is its role? What is its criticality? And so we build criticalities in kind of each of the different areas that we can classify in a structured way inside the SIM, which is security information event management. It's our kind of big data machine that we run. And then we have, that gets combined with a risk score, which is how anomalous is this event compared to everything else. And so that's where comparing them to their user group or comparing them to an affinity analysis. So how abnormal are all these different things they're doing, but primarily things like peer groups are really useful for us. So this person looks very different than everybody else in their peer group, right? They're the only sysadmin that is doing, like SSH connections to home and to all these other areas, and everybody else is using the proper tool sets, and that would drive their risk score up. But you factor the criticalities that we set as we're onboarding all this data. So we'll go through AD and then say everybody in the sysadmin group is getting a criticality of 8 because they have, they can do higher level things on their system than, let's say, like an admin assistant could. They have access to SECM to change package libraries and so on. And so we look at just basically if an adversary had their credentials, how much damage could they do to us versus all the other roles. And so we typically run in 10, 8, 7, 5, 3, and 1. So like for students in the environment, we count all students across all the universities as a 1. If that's all you are as a student and nothing else, then you get a 1 inside the system. But then where that changes is like if you're a
challenge accepted, I think.
What's that?
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. So well, no. Then this is where it gets neat. Is that if you share an AD record, both in staff and student, then you're automatically a 5, which is how we classify all staff. And so if you have staff AD record and student AD record, and this would work for like graduate assistants, TAs, lab assistants, so on, that happen to get a staff AD account, then we would join the student and staff accounts together and treat those both as 5. And then from there, it just goes up based on what the roles are. And so, we like researchers that have access to, core IP, are all 8s. And then 10s would be all of the, actual execs, and then anybody that's like domain network admin accounts and things like that. So anyways, how we make sure that we're looking at the right things at the right time is that the SIM literally adds the criticality. So there's a user criticality, a network criticality, and an asset criticality. Just literally take whatever they are, add them together, plus the vendor criticality, the triggered, and then divide by whatever that number is. That gives you the new triage score. And then that gets attached to the risk score, which prioritizes how fast we're going to look at it. So those two weighted together is how the analysts look at which events at what time. And then the ramifications for if something goes wrong, hopefully nobody gets fired, and nobody rarely ever gets fired over that stuff. But we have all kinds of, I'll even just here, I'll quickly share the screen with you guys. If you want to see how a SOC runs, it looks like this. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
I don't know which one. Are you seeing the color chart?
I can see recent changes.
Oh, how about now?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So this is actually how a SOC works. So like what you were asking is how do we triage? That's right here. So that is just one process in the greater process of what a SOC does. So this is called a Pert Chart. So we constantly measure all of our processes. So let's say that triage didn't work and there was some ramification to it, then we can actually work our way backwards and say, was it the quality of the investigation that set a bad triage score? Was it the quality of the use case that triggered? Is it the actual use case development? Is it data inside our data models? And we can work our way all the way back to where the problem is. And so we metric these things in real time constantly to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Wow, that's fantastic. Look, we've gone so much longer than I wanted to.
No,
Sort
we
of,
swore we'd be done by 6:30.
I sort of knew we would. I've loved every second of it. Can I tell everyone the exciting news is Charles and his team, we're looking at working with them. So if you're interested next semester, a suddenly popping up opportunity, a brief window of chance, we're going to try and slip some people into the SOC and work with Charles's guys to do some fun things. We haven't worked out what or how yet, but if anyone that's interested, please send us to the class account an expression of interest, just saying you're interested, and keep your eyes peeled. And over the next week or two, we'll let everyone know. And that's pretty exciting, Charles, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, so am I. And so I'm.
It'll pair nicely. We're also launching an internship program where we're taking folks that are in their final year for undergrad or also master's students that it's paid internship where you get to come work inside RNet for 16 weeks. So 8 weeks inside the just general InfoSec org. So across all the different areas of my group. But then also 8 weeks directly inside the Security Operations Center so that you're seeing, how do we handle adversaries? What does incident response look like? And it just gives you a good feel for kind of if you want to go into a career in cybersecurity, what that looks like, at least, from our perspective. And then we're partnering together with lots of other entities. So some folks in like state government, some commercial entities as well that their SOCs are signing up. So that we're getting quite a cohort of, just folks that are out in the field doing this every single day that could start to, provide some opportunities for folks coming out of uni to see what some of this stuff looks like.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Very exciting. Thank you. So as I said, when we're chatting prior to the start of a beautiful friendship, really looking forward to all the things that are possible. So can everyone please unmute your mics and give Charles a big woohoo or a clap or something like that, because that was quite fantastic to hear.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charles. So we'll be seeing you again into the future. You are welcome to hang around now, but I suspect you probably have lots of important things.
Yeah, I'm gonna head off. But thank you all for the time, and look forward to seeing you guys around.
Yeah. Thanks, Charles.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Oh, and people are saying goodbye in the comments. Thanks, guys. Wasn't that nice? I really enjoyed that. That was making my toes curl. And he has other fantastic stories too. So I have to get him to come back. He knows a little bit about the movie, all the movie problems with North Korea, though that wasn't his area. So let's get him back 50 times. And there are so many people out there with such good war stories. And this year we've had less of them than normal coming along sharing their stories. So let's make sure if you're a tutor in the course next year, can you just keep hassling me to make sure some of the amazing people out there come along, because it is really great to hear from them. Just as a show of hands, who'd be vaguely interested in having a try in the SOC to give it a go? Yeah, a couple. That's fantastic. Oh, so interesting. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Well, now let me just get the lecture notes up. Excuse me. While I do that, you guys can all go there. Hopefully they're not protected in any way at all. Let me know if they are, but I think they should be open. And just going. Slowly. And while I'm doing this, let me talk at the same time that on Wednesday, don't forget, we'll be running a revision lecture. So if you've got any questions to ask me, where am I? I'm lost. Shouldn't have done two things at once. So if you've got any questions, ask them on the exam page ahead of the, go to Exam Central and ask questions at the bottom there, and we'll make sure we cover them in the revision class on Wednesday. And Lachlan's also running a revision for the extended stream just beforehand. And let me go down to the notes. Nearly there.
Hey, Richard, we're having trouble getting into the notes.
Oh, then that will be my mistake. Then I might have got the permissions wrong. Thanks for telling me. It says default. What have I done wrong? It's funny, it's saying default. I'll change it to custom. And the default for custom is the default. Can you get in now?
No.
No? Oh, that's very... Am I in the wrong week, maybe? Oh, yeah, that's my problem. Gee.
Week 11.
Yeah, that was my fault. So there you go. I was sharing week 10 with everyone. Yep, you were quite right. Thank you. There we go. You should be able to get in now. So last lecture, let me share the screen so everyone can see what I'm looking at in case you can't see two screens at once. Share the screen. And there we go. Okay, so we've got the last lecture, incident response and SOCs. We've done that. And we're going to talk a little bit about the future now and about cyber war and cyber terror, and then we'll sort of wrap up the course at the end. There are a whole lot of key players in the cyber landscape, and you probably should start knowing their acronyms. So there's the ACSC. I was going to write them all in here. I've written some of them in randomly, but I should make a list. But you certainly should know the ACSC and the ASD and the DST. And there's lots of other people, so I'll think of them as we go. But there's just basically a whole alphabet of soup of organisations and people to know in Australia, just so you know how everyone all sort of fits together. Now, I'm just briefly to put things in context, I want to start by talking about cybercrime. We've never really spoken about it properly. And cybercrime is sort of the past, but let's get to understand that now. And then I want to move on to talking about the future. So Rachel Noble, who last year, actually we had speaking here last year at our SECedu conference, when she was heading up the ACSC, she's now the head of the ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate. That's really big business. No, really big, really serious business, big bickies. And she's an amazing person. And you can see videos of her online and you know, I'm really proud that she's heading up the ASD. The Australian Signals Directorate is our, I don't know, what would you call them? Our ASIO? No, not our ASIO. ASIO's our ASIO. They're like our NSA or something like that. They're the military secret cyber sort of capability inside the services. And I'm pretty sure it's actually an offence to identify anyone that works for them except for the head. I hope I've got that right. Or if so, let's delete that bit in the video when I said her name. But anyway, a lovely person. Last year when she was running the ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, who gathers a lot of data, she just published some results, and it's interesting to talk about that cybercrime costs Australia about $29 billion a year. So that's big. For something that 20 years ago, we couldn't get anyone to pay attention. And when we used to teach it at uni, everyone would think it was a waste of time. And you could never persuade your companies to invest in it. And my students, when they went out, just had these nightmares trying to get any budget at all, get anyone to change anything. The thing that Charles was talking about, that you're the person that says no and everyone hates you. $29 billion a year is the current cost annually, and that's expected to grow. The most common sort of cybercrime that we have in Australia is online fraud. That includes romance scams and bank scams. And about 15 years ago, a student came up to me and said, I want to do my honours project while I was teaching cyber. She said, I want to do my honours project in online dating scams. And I said, what are online dating scams? And she said, lots of people now do dating online. And I said, how can you even do that? And she was explaining how it worked. And she said, but people impersonate other people and trick them, and all this love's involved and money's involved. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds a little bit interesting. And looking back now, I mean, she was inspired and brilliant. What I should have said is, oh, wow, that's fantastic. Let's set up a whole center on this. Let's research what's going on. Let's try and, because so much human misery and crime has been based around this thing that if we'd got in early, maybe it could have been headed off. And often I look back and think, there's just sometimes when students are talking, I need to listen a little bit more carefully. I don't know what she's doing now, but I expected something amazing. She was just so spot on about what was going to rise up. And banking scams. And what's a banking scam? Well, the most obvious one, and this is when people ask me, oh, I've been hacked, do I have to worry about my bank being compromised or my bank account being compromised? So the most obvious way of compromising someone's bank account, like I got a really interesting email the other day, an SMS saying, oh, there's a problem with some ANZ transaction. I don't know if anyone's got this. I took a screenshot of it. I should upload it. Please visit our website. And it was anz.com.au.unusual.transaction. Oh, the most amazing URL I've ever seen. Or unusual report or something like that. So there's obviously a top-level domain name of report or action or something like that. And I went around my family and showed this to everyone and said, is this a scam? And they all said, yeah, it is. Because they knew, because it was Dad coming around showing everyone something on a phone. The answer is always, yes, it's a scam. And I said, what about this message tells you it's a scam? And they looked at it and they all said, looks legit. And I went around showing it to everyone that I was legally allowed to get close to. And everyone I showed it to said, yeah, it looks legit. How would you even tell? I mean, it's probably a scam. I guess it is since you're showing me. How clever is that? That's a human weakness, a human flaw. So what would happen, I anticipate, if you clicked on that link, is a traditional banking scam, that it would take you to a website that looked just like the ANZ website, and it would ask you to log in. And it would look just like the ANZ website because they've stolen probably the whole ANZ website. They've just spied it and taken it and all the images and everything, and they made it look exactly like it. And when you log in, they will scrape that credential. And if they're clever enough to man in the middle of the whole thing, they'll then actually log you in and send you off to the ANZ page. And you won't even notice it's happened. And if not, they'll give some sort of error message and send you to an ANZ error page that says, oh, please re-enter your password. And when you re-enter the password, it goes back to the ANZ page. But they'll have your username and password then. And then now they can log in as you and do online banking scams. So that is, an almost impossible to detect attack. And I reckon that URL would work for everyone. For just about everyone. I was lucky because I didn't have an ANZ account, as far as you know. So business email compromises are also a big thing that she mentions, and you should probably know about them and you should look them up, but they're really common. Social engineering, and notice these are social engineering scams. But $29 billion annually. I should have put the stats up, but cybercrime is now bigger than all. This is my recollection. I really wish I had the stats to check it. It's bigger both in number and cost impact, in both of those things, number reported and cost and impact, than all other physical crimes combined. So all the things that you normally think the police are there to deal with and do and look after, cybercrime is bigger than all of them. So the police are there to stop crime, but the biggest crime of all is something probably the police are least trained and classically least able to. I mean, the ones, when you imagine a police person, it's not someone who can stop a hacker. And then that's the biggest thing. There you go. So it's growing fast. So I want everyone to understand. Oh, someone.
Sorry. Biggest in terms of money involved?
Yeah, I think, but I don't have the stats here. So, I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure it was, certainly it's biggest in terms of money. Unless you count, I was going to make a joke. Biggest in terms of money, in terms of crime, is my understanding, and biggest in terms of number of incidents. So, yeah, I believe that's the case. You might want to check, because there have been some huge crimes. Like, for example, when Dick Pratt's empire stole all that money with a cardboard cartel that he set up. How much was that? Yeah, I bet it wasn't $29 billion. Yeah, I reckon even if you include all this white-collar stuff, even if you include all Alan Bond stuff, even if you include all that, I wouldn't be surprised. I suspect it's bigger. But the stats that I saw when I spoke about it last year was there was a bar chart, and I can't remember what the description of the bars were, but you could see the bars for the different types of crime, and the bar for cyber was bigger than all the other bars added together. I only wish I could remember if it was number, incident, or reported, or value, but I'm pretty sure it would be value. But who knows? Because I guess some crimes, now I'm being reasonable and thinking about it, some crimes, the value you can't really measure in money. So if someone's murdered or something like that, maybe they just say, oh, that's not much value. But of course, that's a terrible, terrible crime. So I am embarrassed that I don't have the chart here to show you. But nonetheless, the vibe of the chart is cybercrime's big. It's no longer a silly thing. It's a big thing that legitimately is a crime that's hurting the nation. In the news, this was a random thing, but because the privacy impact statements come out for the COVID Safe app and the response to it's come out for the COVID Safe app, you should probably read both of those, or at least read the response, which refers to the original document. And then here are some stats. Oh yeah, I was going to, while Charles was talking, make a make one of those things we do where we play the music and you answer a quiz. Can everyone promise not to look at the lecture notes? And I'll just do it anyway, but it'll just be me talking, making the music and things. So close your eyes to the lecture notes or scroll them off the screen and I'll just ask you questions. Is everyone ready? Don't look at the lecture notes. Here we go. Oh, this is testing honesty for the final exam. This is awesome. Right. Cybercrime. How much is it going to cost each year? How much is it predicted to cost next year worldwide? Cybercrime. Is everyone ready?
You're sharing your screen, so it's pretty hard to look away.
Oh, is it?
I wanted to say it, but I didn't have the heart to.
Oh, you are so nice. So guys, yeah, look, I tried not to cheat, but my lecturer kept thrusting the answers in front of me. Okay, I'm not going to ask you that first question. Well, the first question is, what was the first question going to be?
$6 trillion or something?
Yeah, what was it? Yeah, $6 trillion a year for next year, in 1 year.
2021.
2021. All right, hopefully you're not looking now. Worldwide spending on cybersecurity.
133.
Oh, you know it. Am I still sharing?
No, so while you were talking,
read that.
all of the questions were available, so it's probably natural that some people just looked at it.
Looked at them all.
I had already read that. Sorry. I can't forget.
You can't forget. Okay, I'm going to go down here. How many breaches were financially motivated and how many were motivated by espionage? Does anyone know that? Roughly, the ratio.
I want to guess that espionage was like 3 times more.
We need the music.
Everyone write down the percent. Okay, here we go. It was, and I certainly wanted to say that, 71% of breaches were financially motivated and 25% were motivated by espionage. So espionage is growing, but not yet exceeding financial crime. And that's detected attacks, of course.
Is that percent lost or percent of like number of cases? Because I would have thought that there'd be only a few, but there'd be very significant espionage cases.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking NotPetya in the Ukraine, for example, that basically brought down the whole country.
You've got it. That's right. That's right. That's absolutely right. And there's a link there to Verizon where the stats come from and you can look them up. Yeah, in terms of impact, I would argue it's the other way around. If you regard the Russian interference in the US election as an attack, as I do, I think that's probably the most impactful thing that's happened in the whole world, probably in my lifetime, putting Trump in power. So the credit for that goes to Russia. The top malicious email attachment type. What do you think they are? In descending order. Top 3. File extensions. Is it PDF? What is it? All right. Anyone want to have a guess? What's number 1?
JPEG?
Close? That's a polite way of saying no. Doc. Doc. Number 2? Dot. Number 3? .exe. Thank you, Microsoft. Imagine getting an exe attachment. Oh dear, and actually being caught by it. That's very sad. On a random computer in the world, how often would you expect to be attacked a day? Connect a random computer to an outward internet-facing computer. How many attacks would you expect to get a day? And the answer is 2,244, or 1 every 39 seconds. I think I told you the story the first time I set up my own little fake internet. I set up a little internet at home so I could legally teach myself how to do network security. This is more than 20 years ago. And I had a probe machine that I was connecting to the internet to monitor the traffic on the outside of the wall. And as I was connecting the probe machine, it was attacked and taken over while I was connecting it and installing an update. I think it was Ubuntu and I was just doing an update. It was taken over during the installation of the update. It was amazing. So, in under a minute. The average time to identify a breach in 2019. Oh, it's gone down a bit.
200 days?
Yes, well done. 206 days. That's really good. Used to be closer to a year. Now it's 2/3 of a year. So you're breached. On average, it'll take you nearly a year, 8 months or so, to notice it. The average life cycle of a breach, from when the breach occurs to when it's contained. How long does a breach last for? I guess
1.5 years.
Yeah, no, it's better nowadays. Don't forget, these are breaches that are found and reported to get in the stats. So yeah, 314 days. So nearly getting close to a year. X% of Americans have never checked to see if they were affected by a data breach. How many Americans have never checked to see if they're affected by a data breach? Answer, 66%. What percent of
That's a lot better than I thought.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, the comments are like 99%, 95%.
We have so little faith in America.
But it should be 100. Everyone should be checking all the time, especially since everyone has been involved in many data breaches. Did we do it this year or was it previous year? I typed in my email address to have I been pwned. How many times have I been pwned? I can't remember. Was it this year or last year?
This year.
Yeah. Hey, Bobby. Good questions. I only didn't keep your questions going because you'd had a couple answered. But excellent name. Excellent hacker name. How many Americans don't know what to do in... Oh, well, okay, we'll skip over this. The average cost of a data breach to a company in America. And this is, if I remember the stat right, an American data breach. So if you get a data breach, what's the average cost to you? In 2019, it was about $4 million US for every data breach you get. What's the average cost of a malware attack on a company? On average, if you get attacked by malware, $2.6 million US again. How much malware is delivered by email? 94%. How many data breaches involve, I'm going to have to say the word actors here. How many data breaches involved internal actors?
Does that mean a goof clicked the email?
That's a really good question.
It's a strong word given I'd probably also be in that party, so.
I'm assuming yes. What do you think so? That's involving an actor. You tricked them, but you've involved them. I don't know, because everything involves internal people in some way, doesn't it? All right, I'll have to find out. I'm going to go in. That's a really good question. Thank you. Is that Oliver? I'm going blind here because I've got my screen.
Yeah, that was me.
I'm going to have to check that out. All right, but the answer was a really high number. But actually, it's a low number if it has a generous notion of. This is the word actor. What does actor mean? It's not a real word. 34% of data breaches involved internal actors. I assumed that was insider threats. How many businesses experienced denial of service attacks in 2018? 51%. How many businesses or organizations experienced IoT security incidents? 60%. How many what fraction of web requests lead to malware? 1 in 13. How about that? All right. Oh, what's the cybersecurity unemployment rate currently? To the nearest percent, 0%. Projected to remain there till 2021. By 2021, how many companies, large companies, are expected to have a CISO position globally? 100%. That's funny because a few years ago it was like none. And computer programmer jobs in the US are expected to increase or decline by how much over the next 10 years?
200% increase.
Programmer jobs decline by 7%. Cybersecurity jobs, by 2021, it's projected there will be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. Whoa, okay. Let's get back to the notes. That wasn't quite as fun, was it? Without the music, without scores, without all that stuff. Who came first? Who came first, do you think? I think you all did. I think truth came first. Let's get this, share the screen again, and I'll get the lecture notes up. There we go. And just some last little, just sort of tying off a few loose ends. Make sure you learn about WannaCry and not Petra. Okay, Cyberwar. So up until now, we've been talking about cybercrime, and it's a big thing, and there's lots of cyber jobs and the whole cyber world. And cyber started off with 15-year-old kids or 17-year-old kids, as we heard about today, in their mum's basement, fooling around doing good stuff. And it's very quickly turned into big money and big money business, and it's driven now largely by money. But what's been happening in the background is another trend's been happening underneath the money trend, and that's the nation state involvement in cyber. And that's what's been growing, and that's getting bigger and bigger. And pretty soon that, I think, the 70-25 will flip around the other way, depending how you count them. So now I want to talk about cyber war. Now, cyber war is relatively new. What is cyber war? Relatively few people, if any, have been killed in cyber war operations. I'll say if any. A couple of years ago, the count was none. There might have been some. There have been a few cyber operations since then. But the attack cost has been massive, billions of dollars in a typical attack. So what
you bring down a hospital and people die because the hospital's been brought down. Does that count as a cyber war death?
Yeah, it does. Do you know if any of that have?
Well, I know that a lot of power was brought down in the Ukraine.
Yeah, the Ukraine's what
they got pretty thoroughly removed.
They've been owned several times, basically every year around about Christmas, I think. Yeah, they've had some serious attacks. And the last I looked up death stats, I hadn't seen any attributed from there, and it was them I was thinking about. The other thing is the NHS. So when I think it was when WannaCry that hit the NHS really? NHS is the health service in England. It's their equivalent of our, what do we call it, Medicare. So it's their public health system. They are chronically underfunded, and so one way of saving money is not really having any security. Recently, they had a report saying what they needed to do to update their cybersecurity, and they decided, internal documents have been leaked, that it wasn't worth it really. Let's not spend the money on that. And to be fair, why would you? I'd spend the money on getting more ventilators and training doctors. And, it does seem tangential to do cybersecurity. But anyway, they had a whole lot of old computers, including, embarrassingly, some Windows XP machines. And they were badly hit by the WannaCry. I'm pretty sure it was WannaCry. It wasn't Petra, it was WannaCry. And
it was WannaCry.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a ransomware attack that sort of went around encrypting people's machines and destroying data, basically, and demanding money. It was badly affected the NHS. Anyway, the thing I wanted to say about that is there's a really interesting paper that came out last year. I wonder if I linked it in the notes. I hope I did, because I love this paper. It was done by some Americans who looked at similar incidents in the US. And what they found was that in hospitals that have been subject to ransomware attacks, the mortality rate was higher afterwards. And it was inferred mortality, because it's hard to compare A and B when you are in the universe, because only one of A or B happens. How do you know how much would have happened if it hadn't happened? But they looked at changes in various things like response time to an emergency call out, the amount of time it took to give someone a defibrillator if in the hospital they started to record they were having a heart attack and you needed to send an emergency team to that bed. They looked at all these stats and saw that there'd been this massive impact. And here's the interesting thing. The impact wasn't caused by the ransomware. The impact was caused by the hospital's response after the ransomware. So new policies and procedures, new ways of doing things, upgraded security, and everything was slowed down. There was more friction. Everyone was more cautious. So there was this thing, and this is the thing we always try and talk about when we're talking to the government about security. And it's always hard to articulate that it's not just the direct effects. Having these things round is a chilling effect. Having an open and free society where people can talk and do things actively and so on and interact, there's all these benefits you can't really measure. And once you start closing things down and putting barriers in the ways and having all this extra regulation, all these rules, and people live in a little bit of fear of getting in trouble because we were attacked last time, and then there's this sort of general slowing down. And they had enough data over a really large number of hospitals, they could come up with statistically significant results. And it's conjectured that the cost in the NHS would have been equivalent and lives would have been lost. as a result of that. Now, the NHS, some people over in England have just recently, a couple of months after that first one, like around December or something last year, put out some reports saying, there were no deaths as a result of it. But they were just looking at the immediate period, I think, of during the attack and while the system's been implemented. But this new research is more interested in what is the long-term effect of people having been attacked. They just become more cautious, and that is really bad. So cyber war is a new thing. So there's all these domains of war. So the first domain of war is land. We have an army. And the second domain of war is, what do you think? Everyone, let's guess. Where do people start killing each other next?
Resources?
Oh, no, not on land. We're going to just go to
The
different.
sea?
The sea. Yeah, that's right. They started killing each other in sea. That's the second domain of war. Where do you reckon the third domain of war was?
The air.
Yeah, that's right. What do you think the fourth domain of war was?
Space.
Space. That's right. Under Reagan, thank you very much, Star Wars. And the fifth domain is cyber.
Blockchain.
Where does like bio fit into it?
What's that?
Where does like bio fit into that?
Oh, sorry, Lauren, I missed the key word in the question.
Where does biological warfare fit into that?
Oh, I think it might be that that's a mechanism of war rather than a place where war happens.
Yeah, okay.
But
That.
you're absolutely right. If we could do things like Fantastic Voyage, shrink people to the size of viruses and inject them into people's bloods or something like that and travel around inside people's body, I guess inside bodies would be, maybe the nano wars of the future will be actually inside people and things. So, yeah, maybe that's a different scale. That's right. It has been announced by most countries around the world that they now regard the fifth domain as being cyberspace. It's been established and it's being militarized. And Australia was a fairly early adopter, I think, in the idea of having cyber offensive capability. And our cyber offensive capability, if I'm right, and Lyria probably knows this, I think it's all under the ASD, isn't it? That's sort of their mantra, their mission, that they are the cyber offensive capability for the nation.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
There's definitely something in the Air Force because I got some ads on Instagram for it. Job ads.
Oh, yeah. Oh, was it a good
Cyber analyst and things like that. Unfortunately, I don't have the requirements of a degree, but seemed interesting.
Oh, what degree did they want?
I think it's something in CSE, but I'm not doing CSE, so.
Oh man, I'll write you a note saying you're equivalent to that. You should apply. But do check before you apply to that ad that it's not from airforce.mil.au.job.application. Look, everyone's interested now in hiring people, but I think it falls under the umbrella of the ASD. So what is the fifth domain? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the history of it all, but maybe we could just think first. And I've gone to this great conference in the US, though I didn't go this year, I didn't go at the end of last year, and this year, of course, it won't be on, called Cyberwar, which I really love. And it's a lot of really clever people sort of trying to imagine and think about. I mean, there are lots of people with military knowledge and insight stuff, and lots of people talking about lots of the attacks that we'll talk about today who were physically present during the attacks and involved in the incident response. But can you just imagine now, let's play this little game. Suppose you're a country and you're trying to militarize cyberspace. What would you do? How would you attack someone? Suppose we were trying to attack New Zealand. Let's pick someone who's doing better in COVID than us, and we're a little bit jealous because their chart's below us. So we want to attack them. How would we do it? What would you do? Or perhaps put the other hat on and think, you're trying to defend Australia, that's your job. What would you have to defend against? How would people militarize cyberspace? Just have a little think about it now, and then I'll go through talking about what we've seen happen so far. And of course, this is just the beginning. There'll be whole things we haven't thought of yet that maybe you have. Who has, and cyber terror. The reason I wrote cyber terror there is one thinker, I think it's Kaspersky. I think it's Kaspersky himself said, there is no cyber war, there's only cyber terror. So this idea of what does it mean even to have cyber war? When you attack someone, you can't be sure where it's coming from. You're attacking anything willy-nilly. how is cyber war different to cyber terror? And it's got an impact against civilians and things. So that's sort of our question, I guess, is we're going to try and think. I mean, the rules of engagement, it's not our question, it's a question for the military. What are the rules of engagement? What's legitimate war? What's not legitimate war? Because so many new things now are possible. It sort of makes us reconsider everything. And lots of military thinkers have put lots of good thought into this. Who has the capability? Well, it's sort of around the world thought that probably, oh, Adam, you've got someone behind you. Who are they? Are they nice? Hello, Adam's father or friend. It's not often we have family members joining lectures. I like it. I think we should do it more often. Who do you think is the most powerful? Of course, no one knows, but the conjectured thing is, you're probably all thinking it, the US. Who are the sort of people that are then talked about? Well, they're the traditional opponents of the US. Oh, wow. Hey, hi, it's Brandon's brother, is it? You guys look a bit similar. Yes? Can he do good reaction?
He can do good reaction, and this is twin.
Ah, fantastic.
Hello. Brandon too. Sorry, as soon as sorry, I kind of just made you come in. No, I'm showing you off. So as soon as someone else brought in a family member, I was like, I have a twin.
That's awesome. Is your name not Randba?
Is your name not Brandon? No, it is actually Brandon.
Oh, that is so simple. Your parents were very clever. That just solves all the problems that I can imagine.
Yes. Okay. Very sorry for bringing you here. And again, sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No. You didn't. Actually, you've made my day. That's absolutely fantastic. Have you guys done this thing? Because I'm so tempted to do it. Of comparing your fingerprints.
No, and I have considered it. See, the thing is, I don't know if it's an actual term, but I think Luke and I are. Well, that's his name, Luke. We're sort of mirror image twins or something. Like,
Ooh.
I'm left-handed, he's right-handed. And when we were first born, you know how kids, you have crowns on the top of your head. Mine was on the right, his was on the left. I haven't actually tested like fingerprints and stuff.
Yes.
But facial ID doesn't work because my Surface Pro thinks Luke's me.
That's fantastic.
So that doesn't work.
Is there any asymmetry in your face at all? And does he have it reversed in his face?
When we were smaller, yes, because Mum did a thing where she took a photo of us, and if you put our photos in a certain way, like half me, half him, it would look the same, but the other half it didn't. But as you know, when you grow up, you change, and because Luke and I are now in different places, we don't look nearly as alike anymore.
Environmental stuff.
So when you look in the mirror, you see your brother?
Yes, actually. See, here's the thing. What you don't know about mirrors is they're all pieces of glass, and you have a secret twin on the other side.
That's fantastic. You're very clever. It does remind me of a movie I once saw, and this is such a waste of time. I can't even remember what it was called, but there was this idea that there was this other Earth on the other side of the sun called Earth 2 or something. Maybe that was even the name of the movie, or maybe it was a sequel to the movie called Earth. But anyway, there was this other Earth on the exact opposite side of the sun, so you could never see it. And what happened in this movie is the astronauts went to do an orbit. The spaceship, for some reason, decided to circle the sun rather than just sitting still on the Earth and circling the sun that way. They shot around the sun, and then they landed. But the weird thing was the trip took them only half the time that they thought it would take. And when they landed, they got in so much trouble because everyone said, you turned around and came back. You didn't do the whole thing. You know, you're so naughty. But actually what had happened was that everything on Earth 2 is exactly the same as Earth 1, and they're just, the Earth 2 people had gone to Earth and the Earth 1 people had gone to Earth 2. And it was fantastic, except the weird thing about Earth 2 was everything was backwards. So they couldn't read anything, and they thought something had happened to their brain in the trip. And does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, what an incredible film that was. Though if you ask me, I always think if they're on the opposite side of the sun and everything's exactly identical and they're living the same life and world and everyone's identical and so on, there'd be rotational symmetry, not reflectional symmetry. Yeah, so I think it was the wrong symmetry, but you know. So anyway, that is likely to be in the exam, guys. One of the questions will just be backwards, and you'll have to work out what's going on. So the normal people that are talked about next are Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, because they're the traditional adversaries. We sort of think they're out to get America and sort of the West, and they have developed quite good cyber capabilities. Russia has used it quite devastatingly and is practicing probably more than any other country, because they've got the Ukraine right next to them and a couple of other countries, former USSR countries, that they have an uneasy relationship with, that they keep attacking and practicing. So they've got quite good developed stuff. All these China is, I mean, we know about China. There's a whole range of interesting issues with China and things to think about. But with Iran and North Korea, here's the interesting thing. North Korea is generally thought to be motivated by money. So they, with all the blockades and hard difficulties of them getting control of cash and trade sanctions and so on, they can actually get lots of money by doing illegal cyber activity. So it's generally conjectured they're out there doing this cyber stuff just to bring money home, though they've developed good capability because of that. And Iran, after the Stuxnet attack, suddenly they became really good. So it's almost like we trained them to be really good by doing the Stuxnet attack. And they're out there fighting back and being quite capable. Israel, of course, is off by themselves doing all sorts of extra special things, and they're very, very cunningly good and inscrutable and hard to understand whose side they're on or what you do. So just be scared if Israel's involved. European countries are all trying to develop capabilities, of course, and have mixed capabilities. And Australia and Canada and New Zealand. It was mean to put ... there, wasn't it? We're all part of something called the Five Eyes, which is Australia, Canada, New Zealand, America, and Britain. And the idea is we all share stuff. How much we actually share, I don't know. But we go through, because the history is littered with examples of when we're supposed to be sharing things, but we don't. But
hey, Richard.
Yeah.
Could you TLDR what Stuxnet was for the people that haven't heard of it?
Oh, yeah, Stuxnet. So I'm pretty sure we'll get to that anyway, because I'm going to go through some of the attacks. So we'll do the Stuxnet attack. Yeah, but everyone should definitely know about Stuxnet. It was a game changer. And you've got, is it you that has some data on Stuxnet? One of a former student has something on it.
I don't believe it was me. Kath?
No, I'll try and find out.
You know the link?
Sample.
I might talk to you after. I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I'm not sure if they'd want their name said.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, no, it's Laura, isn't it? Sorry, Laura. Luckily, your name is safe from me. They're called the Five Eyes. I always think it should be called the 10 Eyes, but I suggested that at a military conference once. Didn't get a single laugh. Those military guys, they probably have their own humor, and mine's a bit childish. But yeah, and then read about some training exercises that the sort of allied countries have been doing. You might want to read about something called Locked Shields. It was a training exercise in 2016. And we will talk about simulations in the future because they're really good. So what are the sort of history of cyber attacks? When did people start thinking, we can do cyber attacks? When I started teaching cyber back in the 90s, my electrician who was visiting my house, I was saying, I'm teaching cybersecurity. It's really fun. I think he was helping wire up a room or something to make my little fake internet. And he said, that's so awesome. Are you going to do the pipeline explosion? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, the Trans-Siberian pipeline explosion. And I thought he was just conspiracy theory nuttering it, and I never bothered to look it up or anything. And then years later, I found out about it and thought, oh, damn, I should have followed up on that. But there is this rumor that was actually published in a book by a US military person, Memoirs, which has a whole lot of interesting information in it. And I think the story goes that back in 82, the West realized that Russia was stealing a lot of intellectual property. And in particular, they'd stolen, rather than developing it themselves, it was easier to steal it from the West. They'd been stealing systematically plans about how to organize, set up and run pipelines. And they were building a Trans-Siberian pipeline. And so the story goes, when they realized this was happening, the US planted in the files of the Canadian company that was about to be attacked, was about to have some secrets stolen, some false information about how to build a pump controller or something like that. And then when the Russians actually built it and then commissioned and tested it, after a while, the whole thing exploded and it was this incredible explosion. It was this, don't steal from us moment for the West. So this book details it too, but actually, since the book, I got a bit excited and started reading about it. There's a lot of denial about it coming from Russia now that in that period when the Iron Curtain had fallen and we had former enemy people just being our friends, and people were talking about it. A lot of people just looked blank and said, I don't think ever there was an exploit. So the whole thing is in a bit of doubt, but it's a very interesting story. You might want to read about it, but also look up the data going the other way. But if it was in fact true and really did happen, then it sort of is the first example that I know of where cyberspace had an impact in the real world. And they call that kinetic warfare because, kinetic energy and things in the real world. So to have a kinetic impact is where cyber war starts to get a bit scary. Oh, I put the name of the book there, At the Abyss, An Insider's History of the Cold War. It's an interesting book to read. Oh, and I said contested. I'm glad I said that.
A question from the comments.
Yeah.
Did you know Assange back in the day?
No. I know someone that knew him. There were 3 of them, and I know one, not well, but I've chatted to one of the 3. He sort of became famous and the other 2 didn't. No. I think it would have been really interesting to know him. He's much smarter than me. But
Oliver, I was looking at that question and I was thinking, who's gonna ask that? Thank you.
Okay. No. Look, I wish I did. Certainly we've had students in the course that know him. And so, we've had so many wonderful students go through the course who've been in the community and are still in the community now. But yeah. For a couple of years, we were going to ask him to speak when he was locked in the embassy and he was sort of isolated. It would have been a classic thing to do. But I think we waited too long. I think now it's too hard to get him. But it would be lovely to have him to talk a little bit about his story and his experience. So around about 2011, I'm jumping forward in time here. Maybe we should go back to 2007. So 2007, was the Estonia attack, and that's and I remember when this was happening, the whole lot of outages in Estonia. I think there'd been some, I can't remember the backstory. Was it there was some statue put up or moved or something? Or Estonia broke away from the Soviet Union. I've been to Estonia, an amazing place, and one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Tallinn, one of the most beautiful. Has anyone ever been there? Very, very beautiful. And those guys are so clever and so good with the internet. They were the first country to do electronic voting. Their cyber security is really good. They're just absolutely fantastic. And part of it is, I think, living right next to Russia, living right next to their old boss in the former USSR, and being scared of them, I guess. So I seem to remember they did something, or there was some reason. I might be mixing this up with the Georgian. Or I might be mixing this up with, there's been a couple of countries that have annoyed Russia by being disrespectful to old Cold War heroes. But in any case, there was an attack in Estonia, cyber attacks, and it's often put down to Russia. And it's put down to Russia just starting to practice their ability to cause disruption in other countries. And it wasn't even clear if this was a military attack or just Russian activists doing it, but it's believed to be a nationalist attack. And then just before the Russian invasion of Georgia, 2008, before it even started, there was a whole range of attacks and disinformation and things that happened. And again, that's believed to be Russia flexing and trialing and experimenting to see. And that was actually really effective and helped the invasion. So the story goes. It'd be interesting to learn more about that. Then there's the Turkish attack, again from Russia. Russia's the bad guy here, really, aren't they? That was an interesting one. I think, if I remember the story right, and this is interesting to learn more about if you're interested in this whole thing. I think what they did was they took out all the video cameras and the surveillance equipment so the people couldn't detect the line, and then they caused all this damage and explosions on the line, but the people operating the pipeline couldn't even tell that it was happening. They didn't know till long after the event. Did I put a quote in? I might have put a... Instead of receiving digital alerts from sensors placed along the line, the control room didn't learn about the blast until 40 minutes after it happened from a security worker who happened to see the flames, a bit like Apollo 13 and looking out the window and seeing the gas. As the investigator followed the trail of the failed alarm system, they found the hacker's point of entry was an unexpected one into the surveillance cameras themselves. The camera's communication software had vulnerabilities the hackers used to gain entry and move deep into the internal network. Once inside, they found a computer running on Windows that was in charge of alarm management, and they placed a malicious program on it, and that was their entry point. And then they got access to the controls, and they were able to increase the pressure in the line and disable the sensors that went off and caused it to crack and explode. So that's really interesting, and I think I do have a link to the story here from Ars Technica. But actually, there's a couple of good there's actually a fair bit of information on this attack, and some interesting people that were involved in it talk about it. Stuxnet is next. So that was. Now we talked about that before, and everyone says they've been outed, and we know it was the US and Israel. Is that right? Can someone confirm that? Is that definitely outed, and we definitely know? Yes, we do. Oliver thinks it has been confirmed. How was it confirmed, Oliver?
I don't know how it was confirmed, but I spoke to someone at a nuclear engineering conference, and they said it was like someone who is the head of cybersecurity at the IEA, I think, and he was very confident on who it was. So I don't have firsthand, but I have secondhand confirmation that.
So we certainly know that people in the know are confident they've attributed it, and that's interesting. Attribution, it's called. Working out who did it is always really hard because, of course, as you can imagine, it's easy to put false flags and things. But that's really interesting. So I guess we've all assumed all along it was. It makes sense that it was.
This is, I'm assuming I remember correctly, how the conversation went. So.
Yeah. I do sort of think that I've met a couple of people since someone mentioned it in a lecture recently who have talked about it as though it's now confirmed. So I must have just missed the confirmation, if there is one. But anyway, thank you. Yeah, so the story is that there is a centrifuge. Actually, Oliver, being a nuclear expert, you'll know. What does a uranium centrifuge do? Is that to separate the isotopes or something?
Yeah, pretty much. You can't really run a reactor at the natural enrichment of U-235 compared to 238. So you basically, because they're chemically identical, you can't use any normal means of separation. So you have to quite literally just use the atomic mass difference, and you make it into a gas, and then you spin it a lot, and that's how they separate it into the higher enrichment.
Why do you make it into a gas?
Why do you, or why don't you? Sorry.
How do you? The rock.
You would dissolve it in sodium hexafluoride.
Oh, okay.
Maybe?
Dissolve it in something else.
Yeah, you dissolve it in something, and that's a gas in that state.
You end up with uranium hexafluoride.
Okay.
That's one of the byproducts or one of the things that you go through to get to enriched uranium.
That makes sense, because I don't know if you've seen pictures of people from Chernobyl, but their teeth are so white.
There's a great story about how in 2002, around that time when they were like doing the enhanced interrogation, the CIA was looking into that.
Yes.
They found some guy, and one of the pieces of evidence that they had on him was a website that explained how to enrich uranium by filling a bucket full of uranium and spinning it around your head. And apparently that was one of the justifications for interrogating this guy.
That's right.
Wow.
Presumably you could make it a dust and spin it around or something. Can you just grind it? Or I don't know. Is that dangerous? Who knows?
I think it's the amount of energy and the minute difference in the separation. Like the dust, it would come down to particle size rather than atomic mass, because it's such a tiny difference in mass.
238, 235. It's 3 neutrons out of 200. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you have to put it through a bunch of centrifuges, so it's actually like reasonably complicated technology. I think there's like newer technologies as well that they're looking into. I seem to recall something about using lasers to do the enrichment, but I think that might have also been from a movie rather than being real. So
that's real.
I must say,
okay, yeah.
So in the exam, there was an exercise where you were given a bucket of uranium to enrich, but we're not going to be able to do that now because of isolation. I'm really sorry, guys. But if you could just draw pictures of how to do it, that'd be awesome. So we have deviated a little bit, but it is interesting from the story. But nonetheless, it is this essential thing to be able to operate a Actually, that sounds like nuclear weapons, not operating a nuclear plant. Oh, is that why? Oh, now that's why everyone wanted to stop it. So, okay, I guess the idea was people knew that Iran was enriching uranium so they can make bombs. Everyone except me, until me right now. And then to stop that, a very clever virus was made, or malware, actually. Well, it had all sorts of abilities to propagate, called Stuxnet. It was quite remarkable. It was the most sophisticated. People that discovered it and were investigating it described it as the most sophisticated malware they'd ever seen. it infected it had multiple ways of transmission. Actually, Chris, you probably know heaps about it. Is that right? Do you remember all the different transmission vectors? It had like 3, didn't it, or 4?
Stuxnet is not something I'm familiar with enough to really confirm anything. I did most of my work on WannaCry instead.
Oh, okay, all right. So yeah, and maybe I'm mixing the two up as well. But nonetheless, this software infected the Uranian centrifuges, caused them to go a little bit crazy and destroy themselves and caused massive damage to Iran's nuclear enrichment program. Unfortunately, the virus also escaped, didn't it? Didn't it also escape a little bit? I seem to remember it did get out into the West.
Yes, I'm actually looking at Wikipedia. Amazing stuff. It went to other countries such as Indonesia, United States even, Pakistan, and India.
Yeah. There you go.
I thought it is very specific, so you target only the computers in Iran uranium-based plants.
Yes, it was. I didn't quite hear what you said at the beginning, but it certainly was targeted to cause damage to those particular machines. But maybe the infection vector was more general and it was able to escape. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was, without doubt, when the world saw it, we suddenly thought, this is almost James Bondy. This is cyber war. Rather than taking out this place with explosives or putting a secret agent in there or doing anything else or economic sanctions, they sent in some cyber attack and they took out they had a kinetic impact on the nuclear enrichment process in Iran.
Was Stuxnet the one that had the computers were actually air gapped? So the only way to get on was some lunatic plugging in a USB?
That's my recollection too. Clifford's putting his hands up here. How was it, Clifford? Oh, you can't speak. Yeah, but that's
well
my
said.
So we should talk about air gapping. Have we ever mentioned air gapping before? The phrase air gapping means your network is not actually connected to the internet. So, and it's not connected because you've got some clever device like a firewall and you say, oh, this stops all connections. There's literally no wire joining it to the other one. And there's no wireless card or anything like that. So there's no physical connection. So no physical connection means an air gap. And the air gapping is supposed to be the best form, supposed to be the perfect defense. And whenever we set up cyber labs in the old days, we used to have a black lab and a white lab, and you do good exercises on the white lab and bad exercises on the black lab. And we made sure that the black lab was air gapped off the uni's network. So you couldn't, from the black lab, there was no wire connecting anything to anything. And then one day I was in the CSE server room looking at our beautiful labs, and I saw a wire coming out of the black lab machine. And I said, that's a network wire. And they said, yeah. And I said, this machine's supposed to be air gapped. And I said, oh, look, it's as good as air gapped. I mean, it goes from here to this firewall machine, and we've completely locked it down. It's just convenient for administration to have a little wire there, but don't worry, it's so paranoid. There's no way of getting out. So then, as you can imagine, every year the exercise I gave was first person to get out wins a prize. And every year people would get out different ways, well, tunneling through DNS, you can imagine all the different ways they tried. Well, you probably can't literally imagine them because they were very clever students, but you can just imagine they tried whatever this wire was being used for legitimate traffic, let's try and overlay malicious traffic through that same wire. And they were always able to. So air gapping is quite good. And whenever we talked about air gapping in the past, we always said, even when you think you're air gapped, you're not really air gapped, you can still get in. And it was a theoretical discussion, and Stuxnet actually proved that it was possible. So, because all you've got to do is think of a reason why someone would want to connect to this machine. And in those days, everyone had USB sticks. So you thought, well, maybe they want to carry an update on a USB stick, or maybe they'll want to load some images on so they can change their background thing. So although it's air gap network wise, someone will carry a USB stick across like a coconut floating across the Pacific Ocean with a cane toad on it. So this is how cane toads came to Australia, I'm pretty sure, coconuts floating across the ocean or being carried by swallows.
Are you suggesting coconuts migrate?
They could be carried by a bird. And so what the Stuxnet did was very clever. It was it infected USB sticks, just hoping that one day someone's going to stick one in, and they did, and it got in. Isn't that clever? Air gap. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, then going back up to I had the Chinese infiltration. So that the Chinese attacks are interesting, and I don't know if they've been attributed yet. There is a Department of Homeland Security on this particular incident, report on this particular incident, but it's widely suspected, and I think it's the case, that China has for a long time been engaged in gathering information about networks and infrastructure around the world. So going onto networks, gathering all the information about it, but not doing anything malicious, going away and storing it. And we've seen that on lots of networks. And we've actually seen physical intelligence, actual spies going into organizations and getting data and then sending it home. So why would anyone do that? I don't know. But the fear is, I guess, that by getting all this intelligence, by going into the network and knowing what devices they are and the network map and what's connected to what, if you ever did need to attack it, it's very, very convenient to have the roadmaps. As you might recall, when England was worried about being invaded by Hitler, they took down all the street signs, the idea being that when the Nazis landed in England and tried to get around, they could never, ever work out where they didn't have to do it in Wales, but everywhere else, they could never, ever work out where any signs were pointing to anywhere else. But of course, if they've already done reconnaissance, produced their own maps and mapped everything else before they land, then they don't need to do that. So those low-level attacks have been going for a long time and worrying everyone, or low-level intelligence gathering intrusions. What other attacks have we got here? How are we going for time? Because I don't want to spend all the time going over attacks. I want to do a general discussion of you guys working out. Oh yeah, all right, we're almost out of time. So the Ukrainian one's probably the next most important one. So the Ukraine, again, Russia, very strategic importance. Funny relationship between the UK and Russia. Part of the USSR, broke away. Ukrainians are largely fiercely independent of Russians, and there's some resentment because when Stalin was in power, he did this thing where when there was a bit of a famine at one time and a very cold winter, he took all the food from the Ukrainian farms and took it into Moscow to feed the Russians, and Ukrainian farmers died en masse from famine in a really terrible atrocity. So there was a bit of harboring of resentment between Russia, Ukrainian resentment inside the USSR. When the USSR broke down, basically Ukraine wanted to be separate, but it's really important to Russia. Here's my naive understanding of military things. I know nothing, but my vague thought is not only is it a matter of national pride, not only are there some Russians living in the Ukraine that would like to be under Putin, but also it's a port. They haven't got many ports. They had to make St. Petersburg. That's a very cold port and difficult to get out. And Ukraine gives you a port going south, a warm port. And if you want to have a navy, you need a port. So that's probably why the Crimea was annexed and all that sort of stuff, invaded and took over part of the Ukraine. The rest of the Ukraine was really annoyed about it, tried to attack the Ukraine several times and take over their elections and put Russian puppets in, detected and stopped just before the election, but lots of anger in the Ukraine. So there's this animosity basically between the Ukraine and Russia. So what Russians are doing, and again, and not yet attributed, but is just constantly attacking the Ukraine. And the belief is they're honing their cyber attack skills by doing this. And it's interesting for the rest of the world to watch and see what a cyber war attack would look like. A lot of focus on taking out power stations because that's sort of demoralizing for people, and it's very cold there, so you sort of need your power. And then every year the attacks are more sophisticated. So taking out one year, I can't remember, I get them mixed up. One year they took out the power stations, but they actually went to a lot of the power stuff is run on the industrial controllers, SCADA systems, and factories are set up to be run by computer, and the acronym that describes a factory run by computer is often the networking, the protocol used to control the devices is often known as SCADA. I'm not quite sure what the letters stand for anymore, actually. And the idea was SCADA was a trusted network. The idea was that only good guys would be on the SCADA network, so it didn't need security. The security is you can't get access to the network unless you're in the building. So once you're in the building, everything's trusted. It's that crusty outside, soft, gooey inside. But of course, the first thing any engineer does, as soon as they have to maintain a factory on the other side of the country that's got SCADA things, is they think, oh, I'll just connect that to the internet and then I can control it from home, and we can have a SOC, or we can have a this, or some sort of centralized thing to remote control everything. So SCADA networks just started getting connected to the internet. And someone recently, I think it was that Italian automotive robot attacker that we had come out a couple of years ago. I don't know if anyone saw him. Did you see him, Chris, when he came?
The which one? Sorry.
The Italian car robot attacker.
I don't think so. I know who you're talking about, but I think I missed the lecture.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a fantastic lecture. But he did talk about running a scan, trying to see how many SCADA networks were connected to the internet, just a general, like an equivalent of a port scan, I guess. And he got some ridiculous number. So just by accident, these networks, which are supposed to be air-gapped from the whole world, are all connected to the internet, and you can randomly connect to them and control them in various. Yes.
I have my own personal anecdotes just doing PTs on different clients that I won't name. But yeah, you'd be amazed at how many people just are ignorant with their own security. So yeah, I've been able to get onto vast industrial robotic systems just through their corporate network. So that's just PTs that I've done as like small security consultancies. So like if you take that and extrapolate to multinational companies that would get far better systems than me, then yeah,
and
there's far too much online.
What was the reason for them being connected? Did you ever find out? Some system that's not supposed to get connected but did. How did that happen?
I believe it started with like, we need to do a critical update on this infrastructure, and the only way we can get it is either go back 40 years and get a CD from a guy that lives, somewhere in Germany, or we can just connect it to the internet and connect to his RPC port. So they just connected like one thing, and that's all it takes. Once one thing is connected, it's no longer a black box network, and you might as well just open it up. So you couldn't get to it from the internet, but from the corporate network, people wanted to start SSHing into systems, and you wanted remote control, but I don't want a jump box, so now I need, it's the small negligence that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago where, it's fine now, so we're outside of our tolerances, but, if it's fine, then now our tolerances have grown, so it'll be fine if we push them a little bit more to the point where, I'm now controlling everything.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, normalization of deviance. That's right. Thank you. That's a great. And so I think when they got into the network, not only did they shut it down, they shut all the switches, through all the switches. They then bricked all the controllers. So they worked out a way of getting into all the SCADA controllers, and they just destroyed them. They worked out how it was such an elaborate attack. The guy that was talking about it, he was on the response team from America that was flown in by one of the big companies. He said the amount of work the Russians would have had to do this is amazing, because you'd have to reverse engineer all this SCADA stuff. You had to understand this particular piece of hardware, had to do all this elaborate analysis on it. But anyway, they eventually worked out a way they could destroy it. So they destroyed all the controllers. So not only these guys lose the power, they lost all the hardware they used to put the power on. He said then they took out all the lights in the plant. So in the power plants, they took out all the lights. So everyone was in the dark. It was just a dick move to do. And they attacked all the backup power supplies for the emergency lights and on the plant. So there was no way anyone could turn any lights on to see anything, to see what was happening. And another time they attacked there was some, that sort of remote control desk software you can put on to let someone remotely control your computer to do IT support. Someone had left that on somewhere, and they used that to so there's this, you can actually see on the internet of the mouse moving around on the screen, and the people going, what's going on? And no one's touching the mouse pointer or the keyboard. And you can just see it going click and shutting off this one, and then click, and they're going, what? And of course, at that time, what should you do? Jerk out the power, disconnect the damn thing, I'm thinking. But no, they just sat there watching, running around headless chooky, while this person was able to use their access to this machine to turn everything off. And actually, I'm speaking ignorantly here. I don't know what the implications of unplugging the machine were, but surely it can't be worse than whatever. So these attacks are interesting. So my question to you, and we've really nearly reached the end, and I haven't asked you the important question. It's what I want you to think about. What would you do? Oh, and the other thing about Ukraine, I didn't tell you. Not only did they take out I heard someone from defense talking about this. Not only did they take out the power stations, they then took out the transport network that was used to transport fuel to the power stations. They then damaged the mines or the refinery or wherever it was that the fuel came from. It was like this triple-dipple attack to just completely get them so they are so stuffed. How would you attack if you're attacking? Just think of the sorts of attacks. Once you start thinking, it's quite frightening. If you're attacking America, wait till Trump's in an elevator, disable the elevator. So he's stuck between floors.
That wouldn't work, though, because they have people in the elevator that can literally patch out all the systems and drop them down. Get
rid of all those people somehow. I don't know, tell them all their children are at home, or there's a shooting at their son's school or something like that, or a lockdown. control all the traffic lights, so there's a massive traffic jam everywhere, so the Secret Service can't get to him, to affect the GPS on his car so he does something crazy. I don't know. I mean, just start, the whole thing is you dream it, you just imagine something crazy, they can do it. And think of James Bondy weird things. That's what the Russians have been doing. It's just a matter, and James Bond, all right, written by Ian Fleming. If I'm remembering right, I think Ian Fleming was even in the Secret Service. Is that right? Or there was some weird story that during one of the wars, he was called in and asked to come up with crazy ideas about crazy things they could do to attack someone else, because they got a whole lot of novelists in that wrote crazy books. So it's sort of stupid, but it's also a good idea, I think, if you want to think outside the box, because cyber war is all outside the box. And increasingly, everything depends on cyber systems, and increasingly everything's connected. This thing we're talking about with this coupling problem that we've got, that's both giving us a COVID disaster, but it's giving us the potential to attack things on the internet, that things are tightly coupled with each other. That was the problem in the nuclear power story when we looked at 3 Mile Island, that changes in one system have these ripple-on flows to other things because things aren't decoupled. This idea of air gapping, I guess, is our ideal idea of decoupling. And we can see how hard it is to do. Things do connect even when you think they don't, and people want to make them connect. So we've got this tightly coupled city we're living in with everything just in time, everything connected to everything else. You can knock out someone by knocking them out 6 steps away from where they are now. Maybe you need to knock out their nanny that does the driving, that does the thing, that does the this, or something like that. So think about the sorts of attacks that could be carried out. That's the world we live in now in terms of kinetic attack. But there are other attacks possible too. So there's a lot of information warfare, and that's actually more powerful and effective. The stuff that Russia did in Chechnya, the stuff that Russia did in the US elections, the stuff that lots of countries have done in propaganda attacks, destabilizing attacks through convincing the populace of this or that. If you look at coups, how coups live and don't live, I was reading about the Indonesian coup recently, or the attempted coup that ended up with all the people from the PKO being killed. There was all this information control. It was really not about who got to have the guns and be the generals that were on the side of the winning side of the coup. It was really who got the newspaper stations, who persuaded all the soldiers that they were winning, who persuaded all the generals that they should be on this side, who persuaded the public, who controlled the narrative and said these guys are the good guys and these guys are the bad guys. Information warfare is really important, and it has incredible impact. If you think of the things that Rupert Murdoch has done or Trump does through information, it can be quite deadly and devastating, which I think is why Australia has the DST led by that really awesome guy who's a UNSW graduate. What's his name? Marcus Thompson. They've got a division, like they're interested in both electronic warfare and also information warfare. This idea of influence operations as well as the idea of the more classical cyber stuff. Now, we've got some connections with the Cyber Warfare Division. We're hoping to do some fun and interesting things with them. I say fun here in a loose sense of the word, but very interesting and very important, of course, things. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, please stay connected to our community and keep doing the courses and keep your eye open for industrial placements and projects we'll be running. But they are very keen to work with us, and they've got some fun physical environments where we're hoping to be able to place students too. So the whole idea of what cyber warfare is, what offensive cyber war is, it is all up in the air. It is all new. And what I'd like you to do is now start thinking about it. Think about what's possible, read around and find out what's been happening. Look at the structure inside Australia. I've put a couple of papers here. There's a couple of white papers talking about the potential future of it, written by military thinkers. I'd like you just to start thinking about it, because I think in the long run, although now we're all distracted by the commercial crime sort of side of cyber, I think the big impact on the world will be how cyber affects nation states, how it affects how governments interact with and control their citizens, how it controls privacy at a large scale, how it controls warfare, influence, and in the economic world, even attacks that are influence attacks rather than stealing money. And I think I've mentioned some of them before, but attacks like where you do something bad, you know you're going to do it, so you almost have insider knowledge. You know it will affect the share market, So you could then short sell things on the share market before doing your bad attack. Like if Russia was going to attack something bad in Ukraine, maybe they could short sell Ukraine shares. If Russia was going to wipe out one airline, maybe they could go and buy shares in another airline. You know, there's all these very interesting economic attacks that you could then do to profit by the things you do. And of course, you profiting means the other side is losing. And yeah, I guess we talked about that a little bit in the guest lecture, how the more naive attackers never think of doing that, but more serious attackers are interested in financial impact as well. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to talk about in cyber warfare. It is all new. We don't know. Oh, here's a list of all the people that the ASD sort of does the cyber for. You'll see it's quite big. Pert Chart I didn't talk about. It looked like it was supposed to be malware. It looked like it was ransomware, actually, but actually just destroyed data. It looked like even if you paid the money, you wouldn't get the things. And that was an information attack by Russia as well as a cyber attack. So not only did they wipe out the Ukraine stuff, but they made it look like criminals were doing it and it was innocent, like they sort of had plausible deniability. Yeah. Okay, phew. So that's everything I wanted to say about cyber war. And now we're all looking a bit bored and we've finished and it's 4 minutes past the hour. Can I just say a quick goodbye and then we've finished?
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
Oh, thank you. So I was thinking about the fifth dimension. Is it possible to think about the fifth dimension as information in general? Because cybersecurity is really, I think to oversimplify it a bit, is about the CIA of data and information. So this would also cover all the espionage and all of that.
That's very clever. I like that. Fifth domain, not the fifth dimension, don't forget.
Oh, sorry.
My personal secret that I haven't told anyone about. But yeah, I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. That what is cyberspace? Where is it? It's not really a place.
Can I make a point there?
The mind you, wars of information aren't new. They're very old. Yeah, who was saying that? Like Thomas's voice.
I was just going to say, like, I mean, the dimensions are also kind of silly once you start talking about cyber, because you get into the problem of, well, it was even silly before that, because you get into the problem of, you know, if people are using technology to communicate securely over land and then you're hacking them, is that cyber or is that land? If you're like tapping the network wires between their computers, is that cyber or is it land? All those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's not as clear cut as that, and it's also probably like calling it information is even less clear cut, because then you're just saying, well, it's anything that involves data, which has always been something that you've been dealing with.
I think that's right. I think, and certainly if we just look at all the other domains, it's never been clear either. Like most of the navies had aircraft carriers and they had planes on them, pilots on them. Most armies have you know, boats and things. You know, every branch of the force tries to expand to occupy as much space as it can. So these barriers are, I don't think it's useful to think of it as this tight classification, but I do think it's useful though. I still think it has some value in just acknowledging the possibility that now our notion of attack is no longer going to just be kinetic attacks. That the military has now acknowledged, and funding to the military now acknowledges, and their power structure and organizational structure reflects the fact that actually carrying out attacks, information, computing attacks are now just part of the repertoire, the toolbox. I remember, look, when they were bringing in offensive cyber, and I was actually arguing against it, and no one wanted to talk to me. I could see I'd said the wrong thing, but I was saying, but offensive cyber is so dangerous because how do you know who to attack? You know, someone attacks you, you hack back. They were talking about it as commercial hack back. It wasn't military at that point, but they were talking about making hack back illegal. I said, but now if I want to get you to attack someone, I can do like a reflected denial of service attack, which I guess you guys have all been looking up at. I can attack someone badly and make my attack look like it's coming from the enemy. And then this powerful person will go out and attack the enemy because they think, you know, so attack, you know, because attribution's hard. Offensive cyber is hard. How do you know you're attacking the right person? But the person said this thing, and I've never forgotten it. She said, if the Prime Minister comes to us because we've just been attacked and said, what can I do? I need to be able to give them options. And I think actually that's quite true, isn't it? I was a bit naive to think we should never attack back. You do need a range of options. We've seen that with COVID. When there's a bad thing happening, you don't want to say to the Prime Minister, you got to do this. No one ever wants to hear that. You got to say, here are things you can do. What's your appetite? What are your things? And so on that list of options should be, you can attack back. Maybe you don't do it, but you should be able to do it. And certainly now everyone else is doing it. It'd be crazy not to have that power. So, so I think I was actually wrong initially, though I still think hackback for companies is a dangerous thing to do. I don't think any company should ever, if they're under attack, try and lash back at who they think the attacker is, because companies are different to states. I don't think they should have the power to attack others. And it's so easy to get that wrong and to be tricked into getting that wrong. Has anyone ever done that with your brothers, gotten your brother into trouble with your parents by doing something bad and making it look like it was your brother that did it?
Of course.
Brandon, how could you ever make your parents think it was your brother?
Caught on CCTV.
What's that? Sorry, Lauren?
Did they catch you on CCTV?
Oh, yeah. Or with a mirror. The other thing I was going to say with fingerprints, I reckon you should do that test and tell us how it goes. One thing I had been going to ask people to do, and I never did, this whole every contact leads a trace. Can everyone just look up how to lift a fingerprint? I reckon in this course, it would be awesome if you learned the practical skill of lifting a fingerprint. So work out, just get some dust from a pencil or chalk or something, work out a way of getting some dust. I'm sure there's internet clips on how to do it. Blow it over the fingerprint, get a bit of sticky tape, stick it on, pull it off, transfer it onto a piece of paper. You've got a print. See if you can start collecting prints around your house and seeing how many contacts have left a trace. See if you can identify whose prints are whose, that sort of thing. And did I ever tell you the fun story? The other thing I was going to say about fingerprints, I keep meaning to say this story, but I'm sure I've never remembered to say it, about the FBI and fingerprints. Did I ever tell you that story just before we finish? And it is...
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I did. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, you've saved us a few minutes off the end of the lecture. So I've enjoyed being with you all in this course. It's been a funny experience because, as well as the course always being a fairly strange journey, it's been even stranger because suddenly we can't see each other and we're remote and it's all very awkward and strange. But I'm really surprised at how fun it still was and how lovely it is to see, especially everyone that's turning on their camera, but everyone that's contributing or even just turning up and all the comments you're making online. I felt very connected to you still. So I don't know what you've done, but thank you. I hope in this course, my hope for you is that you've come along probably not knowing what to expect. You've heard a lot of stuff. There's been much less technical stuff than you would have expected, I'm imagining, unless you were doing 6841, and a lot more talking about ideas. And hopefully lots of the ideas were confusing and unsettling and not clear. And hopefully you disagreed with me quite a lot of the time when I was talking. But you're not 100% sure you're right. And hopefully in your tutorials, when you saw the case studies, initially they looked banal. And then as other people shared their answers, you suddenly realize your answers weren't very good and much better answers were out there. And hopefully at the end of every case study, you've thought, I still don't know the answer. And if we'd gone for another hour, maybe we'd have a different answer. And you're just constantly questioning and testing. And really what I'm really hoping is at the end of this course, you've practiced thinking about problems and getting security eyes and viewing them in a new security way. There's lots of facts we haven't covered, lots of Wikipedia pages we could have referred to. I never taught you Diffie-Hellman. I was so going to teach you that every week. We never covered Diffie-Hellman. There's a fun thing for you. You should learn Diffie-Hellman. It only takes 3 minutes. It's a very clever thing. Ask me about it and I'll give you a private lesson in it one day if you want to know it. There's all sorts of things like that I didn't teach you, but you guys are smart. You can learn that and teach that all to yourself anyway. The point of this course isn't to teach you a whole lot of things you can remember in a multiple choice exam. It's to set you up with a particular mindset and introduce you to a lovely new area where you've never been before. Well, some of you have, but many of you haven't. And just show you how interesting and exciting and potentially how you could improve the world by being here. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope you can see, a lot of you anyway, cybersecurity in your future. Stay connected to us. Tell us what you do. Come back and tutor this course. Especially if you're nervous about doing that, then that to me is a message you should do it, because you should always do things you're nervous about, and help others and encourage others to think like you've thought and accept challenges. Do something awesome in every course you do, even if no one tells you to, and do future security courses. Go out and be awesome, and then come back here and tell us amazing war stories so you can blow everyone away like we had today. Thank you, everyone. What a great pleasure it's been. I think we've now reached the end of the course. Woohoo! Can everyone go, yay? Let's all turn our mics off and go, woohoo!
Yay! Yay! But also sad.
I know, sad.
Super sad.
Sad. But it never has to be the end, of course. It's pretty cool.
Adrian, email the class account.
That's fantastic. Luan, what's the name
Is
of
that a child?
what's the name of your son? Is it a son or a daughter?
My daughter.
What's her name?
Yeah.
You've told us, but I can't.
Hello.
Such a beautiful name.
It's Ray, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
It's not creepy.
Hello.
My goodness, Laura.
Did you end up leaving Ray in childcare?
She's still in childcare, and now it's free, and it's free for us international students too. So.
Well done.
I kind of like take advantage of Australian government.
Good. Please do it. Eddie, I'm so pleased because that's the right thing to do, and that's what a government should do. It should be you are a guest. We should be looking after you and treating you like. So
yeah, thank you, and thank you for your advice. It's because of you and I think a lot of this stuff, and we decided to let her still in the childcare.
I'm so pleased. You couldn't have made me happier. This is the excellent end to the course. So I hope to keep seeing her. And when she's older, please send her back here and we'll take good care of her.
Richard will still be teaching.
Still be teaching. Now all my superannuation's gone. So everyone, it was really lovely to get to know you. I hope I continue to get to know you all. On Wednesday, we'll get together and do a revision for the exam, and you can ask any questions you want. I'm going to work like a lunatic tomorrow. Hopefully there's no more COVID tracing app media stuff. It keeps getting in the way. I'm going to work like a lunatic tomorrow to have a sensible version of the exam, at least 50% written, so I'll be able to actually give you insight into the actual questions as well as talking about the exam in general. We'll be able to revise any questions anyone has. We will record it all, so if you miss it, there's no problems. And I'll keep on the website afterwards so you can keep asking questions up until the time of the exam. And we will release a sample exam shortly before the exam, at least a skeleton, so you can see all the rules and how to do it all. So until Wednesday, I think that's it. I think we're done. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah,
all right.
Looks like it.
Thank you, everyone. Going to miss you guys. See ya.
Thanks, Richard.
Bye.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Richard.
you.
See you, Brandon.
Yeah, bye.
I love you all.
See you, Clifford.
Thank you, everyone.
And like an NSA bot. Oh, who was that? We actually worked out who that was, didn't we? That was goodbye, Callum, A, Peter, Shrimp, Helen, Bobby, who I remember was Tom, Helen, Justin, Sam, Clifford, Trash.
Thanks, Richard. It's been an awesome time.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Callum. It was awesome.
Thank you, Richard.
See you, Evan. See you, Sam.
How did you see through my cunning disguise?
Voice gave everything away. See you, Sergio. See you, Flynn, Yasmin, Brendan. Oh, Brendan.
Tim, do your own something awesome.
Good. Hey, Tim. Hey, I've got to say, your smiling face throughout the lectures always cheers me up. I don't know what you're smiling at, but keep doing it, man. It's awesome.
Thank you.
You too. See you, Infinity Overflow. Who would have such a cool name as that? Oh, it's my evil twin from Planet 2. See you, Clifford. I think that's everyone. Oh, Gaia. Now, I never know how to pronounce your name.
Go Rob. It's Go Rob.
No, Gaurav, I know how to pronounce your name. No, I'm looking at
Oh, sorry.
Gaia 3. Gaia 3. Gaia 3?
Yeah.
It's Gaia 3.
Gaia 3. It's Sri Lankan. Yes?
Correct, yeah.
All right, lovely. Thank you for being in the course. You're always smiling too. It's really nice. Jazz, you too, of course. Gaurav, Bobby. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
Okay. And Theo, I didn't see you. Matthew, it's good to see you, Theo. David, Evan, Vidya, AJ. I'm going to go to the other screen. Who's there? That's nearly everyone. Andrew, Gus, Blank. That's very impressive. Buffet. Hey, Buffet. I haven't seen you for a long time. Carl. It's a problem not having the video on, isn't it? It's less intimate. Joanne. I'm sure everyone had a good reason. And a completely blank one with the mic turned on. Or it might just be an empty tile. Hard to tell. Oh, and COVID. And Rohan. Rowan. See ya. See you, everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
I think that's everyone. And James and Joanne. And that is it, David. Okay, goodbye all. I'll be sad if I stay any longer, so I'm just going to say.
See you guys.
Bye.
See ya, everyone.
See you guys. Thanks, Richard.
Catch
Bye,
up.
guys.
you.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.